Good morning, I'm Howard Hale. Thanks for joining me for today's edition of the Horseman's Corner. I'm taking some time off today, so the program is going to be a rerun. It's with Julie Goodnight from down at the Salida, Colorado. Really some interesting information about horses. I think you're going to enjoy it. Let's get right into the program with Julie. What do you call your outfit down there at Salida, Julie?
The program's called Goodnight Training Stables. We run a small private training center here in Salida, and I wish I could say we're here all the time, but I've spent a lot of the time on the road doing horsemanship clinics and horse fairs and that sort of thing. So I'm very lucky to have a third-generation horse trainer and riding instructor working for me, and she kind of holds down the fort here while I'm on the road.
Must be fun for you if you keep doing it.
Yeah, it is a lot of fun, and I get to go to a lot of really neat places and meet a lot of great horse people. So I really enjoy what I do.
It is important for people to go see folks like you, get some information about how they can improve their horsemanship. What are some of the things that you think are really important for people to be aware of?
I think, first of all, your relationship with the horse starts from the ground, and we all have a focus on riding because that's the part that's the most fun. But we have to remember that the relationship building with your horse really occurs on the ground, and that if you can be sure to have that in order, your riding times are going to be much more pleasant. And what I find that's most difficult for people to do is to think and communicate with the horse in terms of horse behavior and in terms of the way that he understands. Our greatest tendency is to conduct ourselves as if we were a human because, of course, that's what we are. So we have a tendency to think that our horse should know and understand what we're asking him to do, even though we're not presenting it to him in a way that he can understand. And one of the biggest problems I see that people have with horses is not really fully understanding the hierarchy of the horse herd. That's the structure of a horse herd. Horses are herd animals. There's no situation in nature where horses live on their own in a solitary setting. They're dependent upon the herd for their survival. And so they're very drawn to the herd. Any herd has a certain structure to it, and that structure is what we call a pecking order. In a horse herd, it's a linear hierarchy, and that means that each individual of the herd is either dominant over or subordinate to each and every other individual. And so what this means is that there's no such thing as equality in a horse herd. There are no two horses that are equal. That's one of the fundamental things that us humans, particularly us American humans, have a hard time grasping because we're used to this philosophy that we're all created equal and we all have equal rights. And so if you go about setting a relationship with your horse based on that concept, then the horse is what his thoughts are is that, well, if she's not in charge, then I must be in charge because one or the other of you has authority and is dominant, so to speak. And so if you don't present a strong picture of leadership to your horse, then the horse has no choice but to step in and take over as the leader. And that's when the horse starts pushing you around and bumping into you and dragging you over to the grass to eat and treating you, those are general signs of disrespect and that the horse doesn't accept you as his leader. So oftentimes we tend to overlook these little things like the horse bumping into you or moving into your space. And every time we do, that erodes our authority over the horse because in the horse herd, the two things that horses use to establish dominance or leadership is the dominant horse in the herd always controls the resources of the herd, which are food and water, and the dominant horse always controls the space of the subordinate horse. And so if a horse is moving into your space or dragging you to food or when you go in to feed him, he's ripping the feed out of your arms, those are all signs that the horse does not accept your authority or leadership. And we tend to overlook them and say, oh, he's just hungry, or oh, that grass was irresistible, oh, he didn't mean to bump into me. And when we allow these things to happen, then what it does is it further convinces the horse that he's in fact dominant over you. So these little erosions to your relationship are ongoing on a daily basis, and the more they go on and continue, the more the horse comes to believe that he is in fact dominant over you, and actually he is if he's doing all those things. So it's important to not just expect good behavior from your horse when you're at a horse show or when you're at a clinic or whatever, but in every little day-to-day interaction with the horse, you need to make sure that he is minding his manners and respecting your authority, and particularly pay attention to space and resources. There's a lot of information on my website about the dynamics of herd and horse behavior that I find in doing clinics, once I can get people to think in terms of how the horse is thinking, then they'll go about their relationship with the horse in a different way, and it'll help get a more respectful relationship between them and the horse.
It can be doggone dangerous because that horse has you so badly out-muscled, outsized, and his physical ability is way beyond ours.
Yeah, absolutely, and worse than that, what happens is as the horse becomes dominant over you, at some point he may well become aggressive towards you when he lacks a certain amount of respect. Let's take, for instance, one of my pet peeves is the hand feeding of treats to horses, and most people say, oh yeah, you're not supposed to do that because it leads to biting, which is correct, but the horse is not biting you because he thinks your hand is a carrot. He's biting you because that's the most aggressive behavior of horses, and because he has, in an effort to put you in your place, he's turned to aggression. So you're absolutely right. That's a very dangerous thing. They're big, scary animals, and if we don't control them, they control us.
You don't have to be just a big mean rascal, though, to get that respect, do you?
No, you don't. In fact, for those of your listeners that have seen me, you've noticed I'm not a real big person. I'm just 5'4", about 125 pounds. Horses don't have a real big concept of size, and so if you, for instance, those of you that have been around ponies, you might have a pony that is the boss of the herd and is bossing around much bigger horses because he has the right attitude. So it's not muscle strength or brawn, but it is very strongly depends upon your body language and the level of confidence that you convey to the horse. And also there is, sometimes we do have to take a hold of a horse, and, I equate it to learning how to buck a bale of hay. I've been bucking hay all my life, so I can pick up a 70-pound bale and toss it up onto a truck probably easier than a guy much bigger than me can who has never lifted hay before, because I know how to use my body and my legs, all together to do that. So there is a certain amount of being able to use the strength that you have effectively, but it's certainly not about muscling a horse or overpowering him. It's the more subtle things like your body language and the confidence level that you convey to the horse. And as I was saying earlier, your consistency with the horse and not letting him, not correcting him for doing something sometime and then letting him get away with it at another time.
Son of a gun, a lot like raising kids.
It sure is a lot like raising kids, and people make that comment all the time. And the one danger that you have in thinking that way is then we start thinking like a human. But there is a lot of similarities in terms of offering consistency and discipline and laying out expected rules of behavior and then reinforcing those rules.
Julie, time for us to take our first break of the day and get this program paid for, but you folks stay with us because I'm going to be back with Julie Goodnight talking more about horse behavior in a moment. You're listening to the Horseman's Corner. On Horseman'sCorner.com, you can always get back programs that have been done. They're all archived. If you missed an edition of the Horseman's Corner, you can always go back and listen to it, or if you want to re-listen, you can do it by going to Horseman'sCorner.com. That's Horseman'sCorner.com. Welcome back to the Horseman's Corner. We're on segment 2 of today's show, and Julie, sure, the kids and horses are a lot different in that the horse is a herd animal for one thing, and kids, like the rest of humans, are predators, but you do have to have consistency with both of them, don't you?
Absolutely, and you have to have the ability to communicate with a horse in a way that he can understand, and that same could be said of children. You know, if I have a toddler and he misbehaves, and I start explaining to him, you know, the Bill of Rights, that's probably going to go over his head, and he's just going to be hearing blah, 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 blah. So it's the same thing with a horse. We have to learn to communicate with him in a way that makes sense to him.
Julie, what's the best way to learn the language of the horse in your view?
Well, in my view, just simple observation of horses. I had the great fortune in my lifetime to grow up on a horse farm, and I was an extremely shy and introverted child. So I spent all of my time, any time that I was allowed, I was just out in the horse pasture hanging out with the horses, and I had a tree fort out there, and I just spent hours and hours on end out there hanging out with the horses. And all during that time, I didn't realize it, but I was learning so much about horses and their interactions with each other and their communicative behavior. And it wasn't until I was much older, an adult. In fact, I was attending a horseman seminar up at Colorado State University, and there was a behaviorist talking, and he said the very first thing they make incoming students at CSU do is sit out in the horse herd 10 hours a week documenting herd behaviors. And this was real enlightening to me, because by then I was already a young professional horse trainer, and I knew that I had a very good ability to communicate with horses and understand them, but I didn't really know how it was I knew that. And once I realized that that's what they made students in college do, and something I had been doing my entire life, I realized how much I'd learned just simply from observation. And this hit home further when my son was born, and from the time he was 2 weeks old, he went to the barn with me every day. Well, by the time he was a toddler, he could look at any horse on the place and say, yeah, that horse is scared, that horse is mad, that horse is, you know, getting ready to get in a fight with another one. So he had learned the communicative behaviors of horses just from simple observations. So getting yourself in a position where you can observe a herd of horses and watching their constant interaction. I mean, it's constant. There's not a minute goes by in a group of horses where somebody's not flicking an ear at somebody or swishing a tail or stomping a foot. So you can learn to observe. The information's there for the taking. We just need to be more observant. And I think that, again, it's this human versus horse thing. We, as humans, have a lot of meaningless communication. We have a lot of meaningless movement and actions. For instance, as I'm talking on the phone, I'm pacing up and down the hallway. And we tend to say things to people like, hey, how you doing? Fine, how are you doing? Oh, I'm doing pretty good. Glad to see you. You know, all these things that aren't really meaningful communication. But horses aren't that way. Every action they take, every movement they make, every communicative gesture they give is for a reason and a purpose and has meaning. So once we get past that and learn that, oh, you know, you hear people say things like, I can't believe that stupid horse. I can't believe he spooked. I've been by that mailbox 100 times. That stupid horse, he's just trying to get back at me because he spooked. That's not really true. Horses aren't that way. There's a reason why he spooked today, and just because it's not a reason that you can understand doesn't mean it's not a real reason. So just simply observing and understanding that everything they do has some sort of meaning and purpose, and they communicate with all parts of their body. I think their communicative language is fascinating. The majority of their communication is non-audible or body language, and all parts of their body, their head position, tail position, their feet. Horses communicate a lot with their feet by stomping when they're mad, pawing when they're frustrated, kicking when they're angry or feel threatened. Their ears, of course, give communication. The tail can be not only the level of their tail, but the swishing of the tail, those sorts of things. They make gestures with their mouth and their eyes, and And then they have audible communications. It's not a lot of audible. In fact, there's only 4 basic audible communications: the whinny, the nicker, the snort, and the squeal. And those all have very specific meanings. The whinny is a searching or social call. It's when a horse is searching for a companion, or either any companion or a specific companion. The nicker, that means come to me, and that's a sound that horses make, most often heard between a mare and a foal when the foal is in danger. But we hear it all the time. For instance, when we feed horses, we have a tendency to mistake that as a signal from the horse that he loves us. But what he's really saying is, come over here and give me that food I know you have. So, don't let that one go to your head too much. But he's happy to see you, but he's probably happy to see you because he associates you with food. And then the snort, when the horse blows out his nose suddenly, is a threatening, audible signal to the horses around him that I perceive something that could be threatening, so you better watch out. And then the squeal, which probably everyone has heard at some time or another when 2 strange horses encounter each other, the squeal is a sign of ensuing aggression. So it means I'm about to get tough with you. So anyway, so just studying more. I study horse behavior a lot. Any book that comes out, any article I can read, any seminars I can go to. But I think that the way you can learn the most is just by simply observing a group of horses and observing their interactions.
One of the things that never ceases to amaze me is just how perceptive that horse is to little things, and you've explained a lot of the reason for that, but they really pay attention to your body language.
Boy, they sure do, and they are much more adept at it than we are, because we are primarily verbal communicators, so we're very reliant on the spoken word. We, in fact, tend to totally disregard body language. And a horse, on the other hand, he's most reliant on reading body language, and he's very capable of that. And so I always tell people, your horse, from the time you drive up to the barn, first of all, he heard your car and he's learned to recognize it. And he's heard the slam of your door, the sound of your footsteps, and he's sizing you up as you're approaching him. He's sizing you up. He's got you all figured out before you even, get within 10 feet of him. And that's why, people are often amazed at how differently one horse can act to 2 different people. And it's for that very reason. A horse can size up somebody that is confident and experienced right away because they're approaching them with confidence. And so they know, okay, well, that's not somebody I can mess with. On the other hand, if they see somebody approaching them and they're hesitant and they're looking down and they're, dragging their feet and shoulders are all hunched over, that presents a picture of a lack of confidence to the horse. And so his natural tendency is to say, well, clearly that person's not in charge, so I must be. So I'm going to step up here and act like a leader and start pushing this person around. So you're absolutely right. Horses are way better at reading body language than we are.
I have a 2-year-old filly that I bought recently, and I wound up with a situation where a couple of times where I've taken her away from the other 2 mares that she's with all the time now, and she hasn't fully realized yet that I'm part of the herd, because, boy, she gets upset, but it's a matter of I've got to get her to the point where she realizes I'm part of the herd and I'm dominant, and it's not always easy.
Well, you're absolutely right, and I would say that's one of the most common questions that we get from horse owners is, how do I train my horse to leave the herd? How do I get him to where I can get on him and ride out by myself? And the answer is you have to establish a better relationship with the horse from the ground, and people aren't always really happy to hear that answer because they'd rather just hear a quick fix. But there really is not one. The only way, keeping in mind that horses are herd animals and they are dependent upon the herd for survival, therefore they will never willingly leave the herd, then our only choice becomes to make the horse think he's part of my herd, and then he'll go anywhere with me. The leader of the herd is responsible for protecting the herd from danger, for leading the herd to food and water, and for motivating the herd to flight if flight is necessary. Once the horse accepts you as the herd leader, then he will willingly and voluntarily go with you anywhere because he knows you're the leader and that your job is to protect him. If he won't leave with you, it's because he doesn't view you that way. So the only way to get there is by doing lots of quality groundwork with the horse and controlling his space and establishing a communication with the horse in a kind and gentle but persistent way so the horse views you as his leader.
Well, in this case, this particular filly is one that my wife works with. She messes around with her a lot, and she doesn't have any trouble leading her off away from the other horses. It's me that she hasn't been around much, and so I'm just going to have to take her into the round pen, get to work, and we'll get it worked out.
A relationship doesn't transfer from one person to another, so if you want to develop that relationship with the filly, then you have to do the work yourself. Nothing comes cheap or easy with horses.
No, but it's sure a lot of fun, isn't it?
It sure is, and I don't know why we keep coming back for more, but the longer I do it, the more I really appreciate the animal, and I just love to learn more and more every day because they are such fascinating animals.
Time to take another break, but Julie and I will be back in a moment. You're listening to the Horseman's Corner. On Horseman'sCorner.com, you can always get back programs that have been done. They're all archived. If you missed an edition of the Horseman's Corner, you can always go back and listen to it, or if you want to re-listen, you can do it by going to Horseman'sCorner.com. That's Horseman'sCorner.com. Welcome back to the Horseman's Corner. I'm Howard Hale. Let's continue our discussion with horsewoman and clinician Julie Goodnight and talking about horse behavior. Sometimes I think we do get too anxious to ride before we've done the basic steps that we need to. If you view it correctly, this doing the work on the ground is a lot of fun and very rewarding.
I think so. I've gotten to where I enjoy the groundwork just as much or more as riding. And one thing that I find in clinics, we do a lot of groundwork in all the clinics that I do, and people really get into it because in some ways it's a little bit easier. In other words, I don't have to master the same set of skills that I have to have in riding the horse. Riding is a little bit more complicated because now we have to balance on the horse. We have to learn to use our seat, legs, and hands all together and give certain cues and all of that. And also people tend to tense up a little bit more on the horse than they do on the ground. So I find that a lot of times even fairly novice horse people really get into the groundwork because it's something that they can do and feel like they're accomplishing a lot. You can learn it with good direction. You can learn it more quickly than you can master the skills required in riding. But I do have to say that groundwork done poorly is going to be worse than doing no groundwork at all. And for instance, you mentioned the round pen. You know, every now and then I hear from somebody that says, "Boy, I've been working my horse in the round pen, and I read about it in this book, and it's just not working. This horse isn't doing it right." And the fact of the matter is the human isn't doing it right because horses all will respond the same way in the round pen if they're worked correctly. So if I've seen this happen repeatedly where somebody is just chasing the horse around the round pen in a meaningless way, and the horse becomes more and more frightened and or agitated because he doesn't know what he's supposed to do. So groundwork done poorly is not going to accomplish much. So sometimes you need to go out there and go to some clinics, it's great to read books and watch videos, but that gives you an intellectual understanding, doesn't necessarily give you the physical skills that you need. Sometimes you need a mentor or an instructor or coach to actually say, okay, no, but look what you're doing. You're standing in front of the horse, or you're giving them a mixed signal in this way that you may not even know you're doing. So the end result is always, how is my horse responding? And if through constant groundwork things are deteriorating with your horse over a long period of time, then probably you're not doing things so well and may need to get some help.
Julia said it's going to go to the round pen. In this case, the round pen is a square pen with a little bit in the corner so they can't get hung up in a corner. If you don't have a round pen, use a square pen. Use whatever you got.
Well, Howard, I agree totally with that. There are some clinicians out there that think you have to have a round pen, and usually they're the ones that think you have to have their round pen. I don't think you need a round pen at all. You do need some sense. You do need some confinement to level the playing field between you and your horse, because obviously I'm not going to be able to keep up with my horse on a 40-acre pasture. So I need some sort of confinement. I like working in a square pen. It's a little bit more difficult because you have to be able to keep the horse out of the corners. But if you can keep them out of the corners, you'll actually be achieving more in a square pen than a round pen, because, first of all, you can use the corners when you want to put the horse up into the corner, for instance, to stop. And secondly, when you get the horse working on a circle in a square pen, basically what he's doing is free lunging. And we want to eventually be able to move from the round pen into a big pen and be able to work the horse in the same way, because the horse will kind of naturally develop a circle around you, and we can eventually work him without the round pen at all. So I totally agree with you. I don't think you need to have a round pen at all, but just some bit of confinement so that you can keep up with the horse.
Julie, when we're talking about these horses, any difference in the behaviors of as far as the herd is concerned, with the mares, geldings, and studs?
Sure, there is. It's kind of an ongoing debate with horsemen. Which do you prefer, mares or geldings? And, it's one that kind of will tend to get you in trouble when you get in that conversation with somebody. But first of all, I like to point out to people that it's not really fair to compare a mare to a gelding, because a gelding is neutered and a mare is not. If you neuter a mare, spay a mare, which is becoming more and more popular these days as the process becomes less and less invasive. If you spay a mare, she acts very much like a gelding. And so if you really want to compare them, you have to compare mares to stallions, in which case most people will agree a mare would be easier to handle than a stallion. But what I like to do always in horse behavior is look back to the way horses behave in the wild. And if you do that, in this instance, it'll give you a real big clue as to the difference between female horses and male horses. In the wild, there are two types of herds. There's the broodmare band, which consists of a breeding stallion and any number of mares, maybe one or two up to 7 or 8, depending on the stallion, and then the young offspring of the mares. All of the female offspring will stay with that herd unless they get stolen away. The male offspring, the colts, are driven off from the herd when they become of breeding age, somewhere around their yearling year. They get driven away by the breeding stallion. So they go off on their own, but they will not be on their own for very long. What they'll do is hook up with the second kind of herd, which is called a bachelor band. And the bachelor band consists of bachelor stallions, the ones that have not been able, for whatever reason, to get their own brood mares. And so the bachelor stallions all come together and form their own herd. And the structure of that herd will be very similar to a broodmare band in terms of hierarchy. However, it's very different in that it's not a bonded herd. And so the difference between a bachelor herd and a broodmare band is that the bachelors will happily leave the herd at any opportunity that they have to make their own herd. And so they'll walk away and never look back. In a broodmare band, it's primarily consists of family members and bonded mares, and so it's a much more bonded herd. And so if you keep those thoughts in mind and then think about the differences between how mares and geldings act, the biggest, a lot of people think the problem with mares is their heat cycle, and that certainly can be a problem, but I think that it's really much bigger than that. It has more to do with the mare's behavior, in the fact that mares want to form bonded relationships, and that can be a good thing or that can be a bad thing. Geldings, most working outfits, dude ranches and places like that, prefer to have all geldings, because geldings just go to work every day. They punch in, punch out. They're the same way for everybody. Mares tend to be more testing, more manipulative. They will vie for dominance more easily because mares tend to be more dominant in the horse herd. And so all of that has to do with relationship building. If you don't care about building a relationship with somebody, you have no reason to manipulate them or try to control them or anything like that. And so with mares, you tend to have, for instance, I learned a long time ago, I don't like using mares as school horses because of all that testing. They put every new rider through a series of tests to see if they're worthy of riding them. And it's very stressful for a mare to change riders all the time. She wants to really know and trust her rider. Most geldings don't really care that much about that. So depending on what your personal needs are, you may be somebody that will get along better with a mare, or you may be somebody that will get along better with a gelding. The old saying about mares, which I believe is really true, is a mare will work 10 times harder for you than a gelding as long as she's on your side. But if you betray her and give her a reason not to be on your side, she's going to work 10 times harder against you. And so that's kind of the difference between a mare and a gelding. Gelding is going to pretty much be the same way all the time. A mare is more reliant on building a bonded relationship, and if you give her reason to distrust you, then she's going to hold that against you. So she's going to hold a grudge a little bit more than a gelding will.
Time for us to take a break. We'll be back with more in a minute. You're listening to the Horseman's Corner. On horsemanscorner.com, you can always get back programs that have been done. They're all archived. If you missed an edition of the Horseman's Corner, you can always go back and listen to it, or if you want to re-listen, you can do it by going to horsemanscorner.com. That's horsemanscorner.com. Welcome back to the Horseman's Corner. We're on the final segment of today's show. And, Julie, you talked about mares and geldings. Let's talk about the stallions a little bit and their behavior. There are some folks maybe that shouldn't have studs but do have them, and they can be a load to handle.
Well, you're absolutely right on that. And I am a big believer that a stallion ought to be as well-trained and well-mannered, if not better trained and better mannered than any other horse. So a lot of times you hear people say things like, oh, he bites, but, he's a stud colt, so, what do you expect? And I don't believe in that at all. Look at all the performance stallions out there that are breeding mares every year, and then you can take them in a horse show class and stand them right next to a mare in heat, and they act like a gelding because they're well-trained and well-handled. So I think that is really important, not to make excuses for the horse, number one. Number two, a stallion does require a very strong and confident handler because of the way his mind is programmed. Remember, the stallions in the wild, their ultimate goal is, of course, procreation. So their ultimate goal is to try to find a mare and claim that mare as his own. And I always tell people I've always gotten along really well with stallions. I enjoy training stallions, and in fact, I find them very easy to train because you know what they're thinking about all the time. There's only one thing on their mind. And so, in fact, they're pretty easy to train because they're not busy thinking about what you're doing. They're just thinking about when can I find a mare of my own. And so, but what that translates to is a horse that is very strongly driven to be in control, to be watching all the other horses around him and taking charge of those horses to either fight off the other male horses or to claim a mare as his own. And sometimes stallions in a domestic setting will even portray those same attitudes towards humans. In other words, they might try to aggressively fight a human that they feel like they're in competition with, or they might try to herd up a mare that they think that they ought to have possession over. So you have to have a very strong and confident demeanor with horses, with stallions, and I think most trainers would agree with me that it is nothing for novice or amateur horse owners to mess with. That you really need to be experienced and confident, and most of all, you need to make sure that that horse is trained and has good manners and is obedient and responsive even more than a mare or gelding would be, because of the potential danger that the alternative presents, in that if he's disobedient or out of control, he's going to start acting aggressive towards other animals in order to get what he wants.
Yeah, one of a guy that I knew years ago really had good luck with studs. He didn't, and one of the things that he said, I said, "What's your secret to getting along with these studs well?" He said, "Always keep those suckers employed," and he did. He always kept them working. He kept them riding. He was doing something with them all the time.
Absolutely, and and if you go into a breeding farm where the stallions are also performance horses, those horses are kept on a very strict regimen. The horses learn to distinguish between breeding time and performance time because of the strict regimen that they're on. They use, for instance, if I'm going to go get my breeding stallion out for training, I would put his training halter on him. I would lead him out of the stall toward the training barn, not towards the breeding barn. So we set very strict guidelines with the horses and a very strict regimen that you consistently follow, and the horses really learn to adopt that, so they know that they don't have you don't want to give them a lot of time to think about what they ought to be doing. That's for sure.
Julie, we haven't even gotten into any of the riding aspects of what you do. We've been talking just about the horse behavior, but I think that's very important for folks that are listening to the show to understand more about that horse behavior. In your opinion, for most novice riders out there, gelding the best thing to have then?
Well, I think that what is most important is to have, for novice riders, is to have a horse that is mature and well-trained and what we call seasoned in their training. And, almost on a daily basis I hear from somebody that's just starting out in horses that has made the mistake of buying a young horse. And you can have a young horse that's very well-trained. In fact, you might buy a 5-year-old that's been in training for 2 or 3 years and gone to horse shows and all of that. But because of the sheer matter of his age means that he's not really seasoned and set in his ways, and he's only been handled by very experienced riders. And so that training can unravel very, very quickly when you put that horse with a green rider. And so what I think is more important than whether it's a mare or gelding is that the horse is fully mature, and I mean over 10 years old, and that the horse has been there and done that. And that's what we call a seasoned horse. And so, for instance, I can train a horse a certain skill in a matter of minutes. But that horse has to go through a certain progression that takes years before that horse is what we call generalized in that skill, meaning that he can perform the skill at any place, at any time, and with any rider. And what people don't understand is they think, if I buy a 5 or 6-year-old that I'm getting a seasoned horse, and you're not. He may seem that way when you get him, but he's going to unravel very quickly by getting confusing signals and all that. So I think it's more important for people to look for a horse that's mature. When we're looking for new school horses, we don't even look at anything under 15 because I want that horse to be so set in his ways that I know one bad rider that comes down the road isn't going to totally unravel his training. So in general, I would say geldings tend to be a little bit easier to manage than a mare, but that's a gross generalization. There's certainly plenty of good mares out there, so I would make the number one priority the training and maturity of the horse. And then secondly, you kind of need to look at your personality type. If you want that horse just for a workhorse, and the relationship part of it isn't that important to you, then you're probably going to get along with a gelding better. If you want to really have a bonded relationship with a horse, a special kind of relationship, then maybe a mare would be better for you.
Julie, what you're saying is really interesting. I'll give you an example. We had a mare years ago that was, oh heck, she was a good performance mare, but up till before she turned 8, I'll tell you what, you had to watch who got on her after she got to be about 8, 9 years old. She was kid's horse.
Yeah, and I think people don't understand how slowly horses mature. They're not mature until they're 7 or 8 years old, depending on the breed. And when you look at a horse that's say 10 or 15 and has been ridden all during that time, the amount of life experience that horse has versus one that's 5 or 6 or 7, it's tremendous. So I think you're absolutely right. People don't really have a appreciation for how long it takes. And the other problem we run into is unfortunately breeders are all they have to sell is young horses. So trainers will almost always tell novice horse people, get an older horse, but then when they go start looking at horses, if they go to a breeding farm, the breeder's going to say, oh, yeah, that's true, but I'll tell you what, this 4-year-old is the nicest horse, and, da-da-da-da. So they end up getting convinced to buy a young horse because that's generally all the breeders have to sell. And so they get into trouble that way. I call it the puppy syndrome, too. People that are inexperienced with horses think, oh, well, I want to get a young horse so we can grow up together like I would a puppy. But it doesn't work that way with horses because at least one of you needs to know what you're doing. And if I'm somebody new to horses and I'm a beginner rider, how could I possibly train a horse to do something I don't know how to do? It seems incredibly illogical to me, but yet people are doing it all the time everywhere. So, but I think you're right. Don't make the mistake of thinking just because a horse is 5 or 6 years old and he's broke and trained that he's a good enough horse for you. If you're a beginner, you need to get that age and life experience in there too.
The best kids in novice horses that I've seen were, you're right, they were all at least 10 years old and some of them older. I sold one horse to some folks as a kid's horse when he was 24. He happened to be a long-lived rascal, and their kids rode him until he was over 30.
Yep. Yeah, we just put down my son's horse from when he was a baby, and he was 36 years old. And we pretty much used him right up. We didn't use him hard, but he was usable up until he finally gave out on us. But those golden years are sometimes the best, and a lot of times you can find horses really cheap that are, say in the 18 or over bracket. They've still got lots of good years left on them. You won't be able to resell that horse probably and get your money back out of them, but boy, you can get some good years and have some real safe, reliable horses in that age bracket.
Yeah, and you can learn a lot.
Absolutely. The horses are teachers. One of us has to know what we're doing, so the best thing that can happen to any rider, and I was fortunate for it to happen to me when I was a child, is to be able to ride what we call a schoolmaster, a horse that knows it all, and that's the way you really learn. How can I learn to train a finished horse if I've never learned to ride one that was already finished? So we have a lot to learn from those horses.
Julie, do you have some books and videos out?
I sure do, Howard. Thanks for asking. I've got, we've been talking all this time about behavior and groundwork with horses, which is my true passion and my love. Probably what I'm better known for is improving people's riding skills. And there's, in these days of natural horsemanship being so popular, there's a lot of focus on groundwork and horse behavior. And at some point, people usually recognize, hey, that's great, I got the groundwork down, but now I need to become a better rider. So I have both some audios and videos on improving your riding skills, and they're excellent tools. They're meant to go together. The riding videos are 2, and they're coming out in DVD this fall, but it's 2 parts, and part 1 is to improve your balance and rhythm with the horse. Part 2 is to improve your communication and control. And then the audio portion is something you can listen to in the car, and it also gives you a mounted workout that you listen to while you ride. So they're very effective for improving your riding skills. I've also just filmed some videos on doing groundwork with horses. There's one on round pen work and another one on lead line work. What we did was we took some untrained horses and trained them through the course of filming the videos, so it kind of shows you, and we use several different horses, so it gives you a perspective of how different horses respond. I've also got a book out called Ride with Confidence, and it's for targeted towards people that are struggling with fear issues around horses. There's also an audio companion that goes with that book, and fear is a subject that's, of course, very prevalent in the horse world, but not talked about very much. And there's lots and lots of people out there that are struggling with fear issues around horses, so the book and the audio are targeted towards those people. So and we have a few other odds and ends like training halters and leads and that sort of thing. And all of this stuff is available on my website. It's juliegoodnight.com. And there's also lots of free information on the website, articles and Q&As and that sort of thing. So we hope people will check that out. And I also have a free monthly email newsletter, and it has a very popular Q&A column in it, and about all the things we've been talking about, questions that people write in with, and you can sign up for that on my website. It goes out on the 1st of every month.
Julie, we've flat run out of time for this program today, but gosh, thanks for being with me. This was really interesting what you were talking about. Got to get back and talk to you again, your wealth of knowledge.
Thank you very much, Howard. It's been my pleasure. Thank you for all the work that you do.
Well, that's it for today's edition of the Horseman's Corner. Thanks to Julie Goodnight, and thanks to you folks for being along with us as well. I'm Howard Hale, and I'll say goodbye. May God bless you next week, same time, same place.